After months of emails, I sold an arcade machine. The customer claimed it was damaged, refused repairs, and started a PayPal dispute. In the end, he lost his money and the machine, while I donated the funds to charity. What a twist. This narrative does not belong to me. It is a cross-post from the renowned professional user Weapon on the subreddit Locked Away. Approximately 2 years ago, a man contacted me through email repeatedly for several months. He was quite reasonable, but exceedingly particular and indecisive about his preferences. Eventually, he placed an order for a premium, 4-player arcade machine adorned with Star Wars graphics. He invested $3,000 and paid an additional $220 for shipping. The machine was delivered to Melbourne 5 days later, and he called me, extremely upset. It had sustained damage during transit. I always send items fully insured, so I reassured him that he was protected. I requested he send me pictures of the damage. The damage was minimal and purely structural. The console was slightly displaced due to something heavy being placed on it. I assured him it could be repaired. I proposed hiring a cabinet maker to fix it at my expense and then filing a claim with the insurance later. However, he declined this offer. I suggested, "All right, I will arrange to have it picked up and returned, and I will process a full refund, including the shipping cost." He rejected that option as well. "Then what would make you satisfied?" I inquired. "It's a simple fix. Perhaps I can pay you what I would have paid the contractor, around $250, and you could handle the repair yourself." No, he insisted on receiving a complete refund and keeping the machine. I explained that was not feasible. The insurance policies wouldn't permit it due to the minor nature of the damage. It's akin to car insurance. They wouldn't consider writing off an entire vehicle for trivial damages that could be addressed. He was uninterested. He wanted his money back. I reiterated that they would not allow it, and I certainly wouldn't offset the costs myself. I could either arrange for the unit to be collected at my expense and issue him a refund, or we could have it repaired. He again declined. He had made the payment through PayPal and was initiating a dispute, claiming the item did not arrive as advertised. I reminded him of PayPal's policies, stating that to secure a refund, he needed to provide evidence that he had returned the item or arranged for its collection. He remained resolute in his claim to keep the machine and receive a refund. I informed him that what he was doing amounted to fraud and theft. I also mentioned that PayPal would freeze the $3,220 in my account, and I was not responsible for this situation. PayPal acts on any disputes funds are frozen in the seller's account, creating a presumption of guilt until proven otherwise. Resolving such issues can take up to 90 days, and occasionally as long as 6 months. I've experienced this in the past. He was unfazed. A short while later, I received a notification from PayPal indicating that my funds were frozen pending the dispute. The next step involved presenting my case to them, supplying evidence, etc., as they facilitated communication between the buyer and seller. PayPal consistently favors the buyer, and sellers are generally at a disadvantage. If a resolution is not reached, one can request PayPal's judgment, but their decisions are final. I submitted my communications indicating I would collect the item and refund him, while he provided a falsified pickup receipt. From PayPal's perspective, he had fulfilled his obligations and became entitled to a resolution. Consequently, they ruled in his favor. Now, he has his money back and my $3,000 machine. I was enraged, and he was avoiding my calls and emails. Being a large individual raised in a tough environment, I contemplated driving the 900 kilometers south, knocking on his door, and repossessing my machine while enjoying the expression on his face. Fortunately, my wife's reason and calmness eventually prevailed, urging me to consider legal options first. Interestingly, 3 days later, he contacted me, stating the computer in the machine had malfunctioned. I responded, "In what alternate universe do you take an item without permission and then complain that it's not functioning?" He laughed and claimed an IT technician would assist him. A few days later, I received a call from someone saying a friend had purchased an item, but the hard drive had failed. It was indeed his IT technician, who seemed unaware of the entire story. I instructed him to locate the serial number, which represents the build date and iteration, for instance, 2,312,201,901. He relayed the number, and I exclaimed, "Oh, it's within warranty. Send it back, and I will send you a replacement." He accepted this and shipped it back. Remember, he had mentioned the hard drive was dead, which worked to my advantage. If it had been the computer itself, he could potentially use a different device and utilize the hard drive as a backup. However, since it was inoperative, coupled with the fact that I had his computer, he was required to purchase a new system, costing him at least $450. Yet he still couldn't play games on it. While applications could be downloaded, there was substantial configuration work and mapping of buttons necessary. A few days later, the IT technician called again, requesting the computer. I explained the situation and reiterated that he could go elsewhere. He chuckled and questioned how difficult it could be to simply download software. What he failed to realize was that I had a built-in safeguard. The encoder I employed was not set to the default keys on the applications. I had modified everything on the hardware to prevent individuals from attempting to clone it. While navigating this is not overly complicated, most people are unfamiliar with the intricacies of emulators. Inevitably, I received another call days later from a different individual who claimed to have assembled his own machine, but couldn't get it operational. His symptoms matched those of someone attempting to use my controls on a different system. Without revealing my knowledge, I feigned ignorance and said I was sorry but didn't have any idea. This gentleman ended up with a useless, empty cabinet and left me a 1-star review on Google. Though it was removed later, the review stated, "Poorly constructed, flimsy, system non-functional. Do not purchase from this vendor." I was once again inclined to drive down to confront him. Fortunately, my wife managed to temper my anger. Instead, I drafted a lengthy letter to PayPal, providing them with all evidence of his fraudulent behavior. I also responded to the 1-star review with attachments of our email correspondence and his confession of wrongdoing. Additionally, I included his name and email address to expose him. He promptly called, asserting, "Listen, no hard feelings, but I received an item in poor condition and deserve compensation. Please remove my information." He was inundated with spam, still believing he hadn't done anything wrong. I told him to fend for himself and to enjoy his worthless machine. My irritation lingered, though. After several weeks passed, I decided to forget about the entire ordeal. PayPal had not responded, so I cut my losses and moved on. Then, a serendipitous moment arrived. It was as if the universe conspired to say, "Hey, this is a gift just for you." While browsing eBay for non-functional machines to refurbish a lucrative endeavor, I stumbled upon my machine. Contrary to his Google review, the item description read, "Exquisite hand-built arcade cabinet, crafted by a master carpenter, impeccable finish and quality, computer missing. Ideal for a DIY project." For clarity, I am not a carpenter. He had it listed for $1,100, which was pure profit for him since he received it for free. I purchased it using my wife's account and arranged for it to be delivered to my home. Upon shipment, it had been packaged in a thick layer of bubble wrap, while upon arrival, the packaging had notably degraded to a flimsy layer. The courier responsible for the delivery was the same one who picked it up from me. He was aware of the background story and agreed that I could intentionally damage it slightly to make it look severe, but not beyond repair in a matter of minutes. He documented the damage as a result of insufficient packaging, meaning the insurance would not apply. I disassembled the interior panels to create the appearance that the machine had been crushed. However, I merely needed to reset screws for it to appear as though it were brand new. Subsequently, I sent the Melbourne individual pictures of the damage and expressed my dissatisfaction. He claimed it was insured. I informed him that the courier had stated it was poorly packaged and therefore not covered by insurance. I demanded a refund and requested he take the machine back. I anticipated he would refuse, as it was utterly useless to him. He expressed his unwillingness to take it back, insisting that he would only refund the shipping costs. I countered that I could not utilize a damaged machine. If he did not do anything, I would escalate the matter by filing a PayPal dispute under item not as described. He was displeased and resorted to playing the victim, attempting to elicit sympathy while still failing to grasp my true identity. After numerous rejected partial refund offers, he conceded, telling me to keep the machine and promising a full refund. It must have dawned on him that his greed was unworthy of the costs associated. I was pleased to have my machine back and content that this situation was resolved, albeit still annoyed by his audacity. Yet, the story does not conclude here. It becomes even more satisfying. Someone within PayPal's business section finally reviewed my complaint. Since I conduct substantial work through a business account with PayPal, there is a semblance of a concierge or priority service. They undertook the task of examining my complaint and validated that the pickup receipt he provided was over a year old and unrelated to the transaction. They also reviewed our correspondence, noting his clear intention to retain the machine while still seeking a refund. In the end, they refunded my money in full. I regained my machine as well as the $3,000 that belonged to him, and he found himself powerless to act since his fraudulent behavior had been exposed. It is difficult to dispute a claim when caught being dishonest. He called me, clearly frustrated. I chuckled and said, "Sorry, but this is karma. Whether or not I choose to refund you is completely up to my discretion. Perhaps you should go suck on a doorknob." He pleaded, swore profusely, and continued to appeal, insisting further while I simply stated that I would consider it. Legally, he had no standing. Nonetheless, I have principles, so I decided to donate all of it to charity in his name. I forwarded the receipt to him. His response was one of outrage, but there were now children benefiting from food and clothing thanks to his misdeeds. Story 2. I quit tech, took a breather, and found a stressful job with a nightmare boss. After getting fired for attendance, I fought back 6 months severance secured. A bit of background: several years ago, I left my career in the technology sector. This decision followed the company I was employed by going public, after which everything began to deteriorate. I grew weary of profiting the wealthy and needed some time to truly experience life. I spent several months traveling, tackling home projects, and essentially doing whatever I pleased. One day, roughly 4 months into this newfound freedom, I had lunch with my closest friend, who advised me, "You should stop being idle and find a job." She had just been hired at a firm in the construction sector and mentioned there was a vacancy available. Although I had no prior experience in this field, the prospect of changing careers was enticing. I submitted my application and was quickly granted a phone interview. After dedicating some time to researching the role, I managed to impress during several interviews and was soon hired. It turned out that this role was vastly different from my previous experiences, pushing me in ways I had never encountered. Not only was my job demanding, but my supervisor also became a source of considerable stress. He had been with the company since its inception and was part of the good old boys club. For those unfamiliar, the construction industry often lacks an effective human resources department. This was a near-billion-dollar corporation, and it still operated in that manner. My supervisor displayed narcissistic, sexist, deceitful, and confrontational behavior. Strangely, most of this directed at others rather than me. My best friend bore the brunt of his actions, and hearing how he treated her devastated me. All of this took a significant toll on my well-being. New Year's Day, about 3 months into my job, January 1st arrived. I woke up at 2 a.m. with a tightening sensation in my chest and my mind racing uncontrollably. Fortunately, my roommate, a paramedic, was home. I rushed to her room and exclaimed that I suspected I was having a heart attack. She emerged, took my vital signs, asked several questions, and concluded that I was likely experiencing a panic attack. As it turned out, I calmed down and managed to recover. I had never had a panic attack before. During the following week, I continued to experience episodes of chest discomfort and heart palpitations. Concerned that something might be genuinely wrong, I visited my doctor. He conducted several tests and diagnosed me with probable acid reflux. He prescribed medication, and the subsequent week was an improvement. Then, one evening while returning home from dinner with my sister, I was suddenly rear-ended at a stoplight by an intoxicated driver who made no attempt to brake. I felt some tightness in my back, so I decided to go to the hospital for precautionary checks. Upon arrival, my vital signs were recorded, and my blood pressure was alarmingly high, 180/100. An hour later, it remained elevated, leading them to recommend I follow up with my physician. The next few weeks leading up to my doctor's appointment were hell. I dealt with daily panic attacks, chest tightness, breathing difficulties, and extreme fatigue. Finally, the day of my appointment arrived, and I informed my doctor about everything happening. He advised me to see several specialists and undergo numerous tests to ensure my safety. Over the next couple of months, I underwent various examinations, which caused me to miss a significant amount of work. This resulted in my supervisor expressing constant dissatisfaction with my absences, even though my workload remained unaffected. Drawing on my technical background, I began preparing reports and collecting data to present to him on improving the department and the company. I later discovered that he appropriated these reports capable of saving the company hundreds of thousands to potentially millions of dollars, and presented them as his own to the owner. This infuriated me and exacerbated my health struggles. Eventually, I completed all the recommended tests, and they found nothing physically wrong with me. It turned out that my issues stemmed from stress and anxiety conditions I had never previously encountered. My doctor referred me to an exceptional counselor who taught me how to manage my challenges and regain a stable mental state. Yet, I never fully reached an acceptable level due to my boss's ongoing behavior. I began contacting human resources about my concerns regarding him and things I had observed with other employees. Most of my complaints were met with dismissiveness. Cue the turning point: a cherished coworker, well-liked and respected by all, unexpectedly decided to resign. She also worked under my supervisor. During her exit interview, she cited him as the sole reason for leaving. She finally reached her breaking point, and enough was enough. Because she was so valued, her departure triggered questions from the owner and senior management about why my supervisor was the cause for her resignation. They arranged a meeting for our department along with him to discuss our grievances. We were hopeful that this would grant us a chance to have our voices heard by those in power. During the meeting, we laid out all our concerns about our boss and provided numerous examples. I prepared extensively and even created a complete presentation. It turned out, however, that this was merely a facade to protect my supervisor's reputation. He was simply prescribed management counseling, which I suspect he never attended, and matters continued as usual. With this newfound awareness of our issues, my supervisor escalated his antagonistic behavior significantly. The incessant criticism, shouting, and reprimands became overwhelming. It got to the point where I started secretly recording every interaction with him. I saved every email and meticulously documented each encounter. I persisted in seeking assistance from human resources, but his position within the company shielded him from any consequences. Thankfully, despite all this turmoil, I managed to maintain my mental health, thanks to the strategies provided by my counselor. I once again get sick indeed. I fell ill again, but this time it was a common cold lasting a few days, all covered by government-mandated sick leave. Upon returning to work, it took less than a week for my supervisor to summon me to his office alongside senior management. I sensed this meeting would not bode well. My supervisor informed me that they were terminating my employment due to attendance issues. I was astonished. I had never been fired before and knew that I had contributed positively to the company's success. I had not slacked off, missed any deadlines, and the reason for my termination seemed to be nothing more than my supervisor's excuse to eliminate my position. Living in an at-will state, I understood that someone can be let go for virtually any reason, except for an unlawful motive. They offered me a paltry 2 weeks of severance pay. I declined to sign the agreement, gathered my belongings, and departed. I sensed that this entire situation felt wrong, especially since I was aware of recent state legislation prohibiting employers from terminating employees for utilizing sick leave. Consequently, I sought advice from my mother, who had worked in the legal field throughout her career, and she referred me to an employment law attorney. Things start to look up. The day of my appointment with the employment law attorney couldn't arrive soon enough. I compiled all relevant documents from my time at the company and presented them to him. The recordings on my phone, my emails, the documented interactions, everything. Upon reviewing my materials, the attorney leaned back in his chair and exclaimed, "Wow, you have an impressive case here. They really messed up." A rush of relief washed over me. Initially, I believed that the only blatant violation was my dismissal for taking sick time, but he went on to explain that the company had committed 4 significant violations. The sick time infraction was far from the most critical one. Some key points I learned from him included the meeting I attended with my supervisor, human resources, and the rest of my department discussing our grievances was pivotal evidence for one of their most severe violations. I discovered that such meetings are classified as protected concerted activity under the National Labor Relations Act, which safeguards against retaliation for participating in this type of meeting. According to my lawyer, my supervisor's actions following that meeting could be considered retaliatory. When addressing health-related issues affecting one's work, it is essential to document every interaction with your employer. Documenting your efforts to inform them of any complications and their potential impact on your job is crucial. I had sent countless emails to human resources about my mental health concerns, and their failure to accommodate my needs violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. Maintaining recordings and documentation regarding how your employer treats male and female employees differently is vital in proving a violation of the Civil Rights Act. After reviewing all this information, my lawyer informed me that I had 3 options. The first option was to retain his services and file a lawsuit. He explained that while it would be costly and time-consuming, it would likely yield a substantial financial settlement. The second option was to file claims with the various departments overseeing the violated acts. He warned that some of these investigations could take years to conclude. However, especially for the violation of the National Labor Relations Act, the investigations could become extraordinarily burdensome for the employer. The third option was to return on my own and renegotiate my severance package. This option appeared the simplest and quickest. I preferred to avoid an extended legal battle. I communicated to the lawyer that the third option seemed most appealing, and he suggested starting the negotiations at 9 months of severance plus full benefits. After discussing it with trusted individuals, I decided to proceed with option 3. I met with human resources and senior management, explained that I had consulted with an employment law attorney, listed all the acts my attorney identified as being violated, and requested 9 months of severance. Following several weeks of negotiations with their attorney, we reached an agreement for 6 months of severance with complete benefits. Years have passed since this event, and I still feel a profound sense of happiness when I reflect on it. Ultimately, I secured an incredible position in the same industry. My former supervisor was reassigned to a non-management role. I genuinely hope that no one else has to endure what I and others experienced at that company ever again. Summary: my boss was awful. I missed work due to mental health issues. He continued to be difficult. I documented every interaction with him. I was subsequently fired. I sought legal counsel and negotiated a settlement that provided me with 6 months of severance pay and benefits, plus my boss is no longer in management. Story 3. Met an amazing friend and started feeling attracted to him. Now he's moving away and I must clarify our complicated feelings. It is a rather unique situation, but I met this individual a few months back, and it has significantly impacted my life. We were introduced through mutual acquaintances, and we established a quick connection over many shared interests, particularly specific ones that I usually do not share with others. Our dynamic was lighthearted and a bit immature. We exhibited a playful, almost dog-like behavior when together. It was a dynamic I had previously experienced with another friend, and I found myself missing it as we hadn't communicated for quite a while, which made me feel good, almost like a child engaged in silly antics. However, returning to the real world after our time together was challenging. Being faced with work and other responsibilities felt overwhelming, and I often thought, no, let me go back. I had to be honest with myself regarding my attraction to him, which troubled me since I identify as butch. Still, I reassured myself that exploring those feelings was acceptable, and I could see how things developed. Our meetings were enjoyable and fluid, yet afterward, I found myself overthinking the situation. I felt uneasy since I struggled to comprehend what he was thinking, and honestly, I was uncertain about my own feelings as well. I observed that he frequently joked about certain intimate acts, and while we often engaged in playful arguments for laughs, I wasn't sure if it was playful banter or genuine flirtation. I became a little fixated on it, but I kept my feelings to myself because we had not known each other for very long, and I hoped things would sort themselves out in time. I began to question my own gender identity, feeling envious of his masculinity and hoping he wouldn't see me as a woman if we grew closer. It is worth mentioning that he is a trans man with an impressive appearance of being cisgender, despite not having undergone certain surgical procedures. He identifies as bisexual, which initially puzzled me, as his orientation resembled that of my non-binary friends, further complicating my understanding. Eventually, we began spending time together one-on-one, which was quite enjoyable. During my first overnight stay at his place, I was surprised by how comfortable I felt, as I typically struggle to sleep in the same room as men due to anxiety. I actually slept quite well. Our bond evolved into a genuine friendship where we exchanged personal thoughts, especially concerning our experiences with gender. I opened up about my uncertainties, and he expressed understanding, noting that he, too, does not fully identify as a man and desires a non-binary presentation. We spent many evenings discussing such themes late into the night while strolling the streets, searching for mischievous activities, or watching light-hearted television shows at his home. We also found common ground in how we relate to people, whether in friendships or romantic contexts, and we discussed this extensively. Our conversations frequently veered toward intimacy, and we discovered shared views on that front as well. Both of us tend to shy away from deep connections and are apprehensive about hurting others, thus struggling to accept that people can genuinely care for us. Typically, it's through slightly toxic patterns that I noticed our similarities. The key difference is that I am incessantly introspective and often obsessive about those I am fond of before getting to know them well, whereas he often dissociates, leaving him unclear about his feelings and motivations. Since we met, I have experienced various emotions. Sometimes I believe we simply share a deep, rapid bond akin to brotherhood. I was in that mindset until recently. After a period of homelessness, he kindly offered me a place to stay until I secured a new apartment. Consequently, we cohabitated for 2 weeks, which was initially uncomfortable for me due to our limited acquaintance and my peculiar mental state. I felt paranoid and disassociated, struggling to keep up with work and basic self-care. Nonetheless, it was genuinely enjoyable to spend so much time together, and we both appreciated it. During that time, we grew closer physically too. As an autistic person with past trauma, I generally have difficulty with physical contact unless it involves those I trust deeply, and even then, there are boundaries. He is aware of this, and sometimes seems to refrain from getting too close. However, we began resting our heads on one another's shoulders and holding hands for extended moments while gazing into each other's eyes until one of us would shift away, embarrassed as if it were a playful game. We also joke about pretending to kiss from a distance, and the more we engage in this jest, the more intimate it feels. He frequently makes jokes about our intimate encounters, yet he shares this humor with other friends, suggesting it is simply our style. Occasionally, I sense there is something more behind the laughter. I could feel the underlying tension again, but I refrained from acknowledging it or acting on it, knowing my housing situation was already fragile. A mutual friend observed our dynamic at a recent gathering and pointed out that the chemistry was evident. However, she is unfamiliar with him. Other friends who know him have similarly commented that it is challenging to decipher his thoughts. Now, 3 days later, I have moved into a new apartment situated right next door to him, while he is preparing to relocate across the country in a week. With our living situation changed, I feel it is crucial to clarify our feelings before he leaves, since distance may complicate matters further. We have already arranged a visit to his new place during my upcoming vacation, which is approaching, but I hesitate to visit another city for a week while our relationship remains ambiguous. Hence, I must address it in the coming days before his departure. Although we frequently discuss our relationships with others and the challenges we face, we have never delved into the specifics of our relationship, as such conversations are difficult for both of us. I struggle with the thought of him leaving, fearing we might lose contact, yet I recognize this fear is somewhat irrational and open conversation could provide the reassurance I seek. I also fear opening up and finding that he may not reciprocate. I suggested we meet during the week without indicating it was to discuss serious matters, as I believe doing so can create unnecessary pressure. His response was somewhat vague, mentioning that he could not pinpoint a particular day due to his transition plans, but reassured me that we would definitely see each other given our close proximity. Thus, that is my current predicament. I am uncertain whether I should message him to insist on discussing my feelings or wait for him to initiate plans. Additionally, I am unsure of what I will say when we meet. I worry about the possibility of not seeing him during the week. The situation weighs heavily on me, adding stress amid the moving process, and having recently settled into a home, I can finally feel all my emotions, including the deep sadness surrounding his departure. I genuinely wish to resolve this matter swiftly. Since moving into my apartment, I have found myself feeling quite despondent, waking up with thoughts of him and grappling with sorrow after dreaming of us engaging in playful antics in the neighborhood. The realization that once he leaves, we can no longer do those things hurts deeply, and I dwell on all that we will miss out on together, which amplifies my feelings of abandonment. I am struggling to cope with this situation. In summary, I have formed a friendship with a man, but I also find him attractive. I need to communicate my feelings to him before he leaves town next week, but I am unsure how to approach the conversation.